Shalom Aleichem. Welcome. I'm Lisa Newman, the Yiddish Book Center's Director of Publishing and Public Programs. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's virtual theater for tonight's program, a sneak peek at the Yiddish Book Center's landmark core exhibition, Yiddish, A Global Culture, with Chief Curator and Writer David Mazower. Before we get started, a few things. Your video will be off. Your audio will be muted throughout. You may send us questions via the question panel. We ask that you keep questions short and refrain from comments so we can get to all the questions this evening. It's a real treat to introduce this evening's guest, presenter, David Mazower. David is the Yiddish Book Center's research bibliographer and editorial director, and the chief curator and writer of the center's forthcoming new landmark core exhibition, Yiddish, A Global Culture. Prior to joining the center, David was a senior staff journalist with BBC in London and a deputy curator of the Jewish Museum London. He writes for the Digital Yiddish Theater Project and is the author of Yiddish Theater in London. He's also published several articles on his great-grandfather, Sholem Asch. He graduated in history from Cambridge University and has a postgraduate diploma in Russian. Well, amazing we're still standing in the midst of all, and excited that we're going to do something a little bit different for those of you who know us. This evening, we're going to take you along on a stroll around the center for a sneak peek of the exhibition, which is still being installed, as you'll note, but it is slated to open, which it will, on October 15th, 2023. We hope to see you all here then. So only 10 days away, let's get going.
So I want to say also that you didn't mention in your introduction that you are the project director of this exhibition. And I have to tell you, we would not be opening on October the 15th if it weren't for Lisa. You know, we stand here as sort of equal partners in this crazy adventure, and it is amazing we're still standing. I think we're surviving on coffee, adrenaline, excitement, and sort of periodic crises and troubleshooting. Would that be fair?
Yeah, and the sheer excitement of seeing this come to fruition after 5 years, as exhausting as it is, you can't help but want to see it birthed, as it were. And we also should mention we have quite a great team working with us.
We do.
Putting this together here, the fabricators, the builders, the painters, the installers, all of it. It's really great.
Yeah, and what we'll show you is really just, you know, inevitably a small part and also a sort of behind the scenes look. So, you know, forgive all the sort of things cluttering the floor that you might see, the coffee cups on benches and all the sort of, yeah, we're in preparatory mode.
So what do you say? Shall we take the stroll?
Yeah, let's give a sort of long view and just talk about some of the sort of big picture stuff.
All right, and bear with us all. We're going to try something we've never done before. So we're going to turn the camera around.
Keep going. Yeah, something like, and then we'll just tilt it down a bit, and this gives you a sense. So I'll just take a look at what you're seeing. So we're for those of you who know the center, we're up on the mezzanine level, not far from the front door as you come in, and looking out over this really glorious space, the main hall at the center, the hall that has always carried tens of thousands of our duplicate books for sale. And still, as you can see, there are a lot of books. It's a bit of an illusion because we had to take everything out of this space over the last few months. We took 40,000 books out, and I think we put about 30,000 books back. And Lisa was in charge of the new carpet and all the contractual work and getting power and lighting where they need to be, and right, a whole host of other things.
Yes, yes.
And so really the challenge, you know, for the team over the last few years has been how to create a museum level exhibit that does justice to the to the subject we want, the story we want to tell, how to you know, shoehorn that and weave it in and intersperse it with what is still a tremendous number of books and a sort of wonderful sense of coming into a center and seeing really a sea of books stretching out in front of you. And so to give you a sense of how we've done that, we've installed, so this is the section about Yiddish in the Soviet Union, Soviet Yiddish. You can just see the backs of the header of this section in these big brown sort of Coney Island style letters. This is one section, and then we'll move it around so that you can see a section which is, I'm just going to come the other side so I can see what you're seeing. This is a section called Women's Voices, and this is really about the sort of gender politics of Yiddish. It's one of this is the literature end of the exhibition. And this section really deals with the struggle of women writers and women creators to achieve equal status, equal footing in the sort of Yiddish literary marketplace. And what you're looking there, you're seeing Bluma Lempel and Chava Rosenfarb, and a story about their discovery of each other as writers and as friends. And then we'll swing it around a little more. And here you can see a section about modernism. And so modernism in the 10s and 20s and 30s was a really intrinsic part of Yiddish literature and Yiddish culture more broadly. And we pick out a number of stories on that theme, you know, Yiddish modernism, just as Russian modernism and German modernism and so on, was a huge deal. All these circles of writers and artists in many of the major cities, Warsaw, Lodz, Vilna, Buenos Aires, Paris. And in each of these sections, maybe with the exception of the Soviet one, and throughout the exhibition generally, we're really telling a global story. I mean, this exhibition started with the idea of telling an American Yiddish story, and we very quickly realized that it was much more exciting and more representative of this world, this culture and civilization, to tell a genuinely global story and link all these different places together through the best part of the last 200 years. All right, so you'll see more of these sections. We're calling them wedges colloquially as we've developed the exhibition, but they're sort of kiosks, display units. We'll see a couple more of them as we go down. So we'll set off, Lisa, yeah? And we will, just gonna lift this slightly. Yep. So I'll walk along in front of you. We're heading towards the ramp for those of you that know the center. And we'll stop here and give you a sort of bit of a bird's eye view. So here, right along this 60-foot end wall of the center, where previously we hung photographs, we've created a montage, mural of Yiddish land. This has been the work of an illustrator called Martin Harker. The brief to him was to create 35 scenes, pictorial scenes to our specifications. And this is really stamping the sort of theme of Yiddish as a global culture at the start of the exhibition. So a borderless, transnational culture united, and this is crucial, by the language. And in some ways, you know, the language, you could say, became a sort of substitute religion almost. This tremendous sense of allegiance and love and devotion to Yiddish, which is the kind of counterpart to the other side of the story, of course, which is the sort of derision and contempt that Yiddish was treated with for so much of its life. That only in a way fueled the sort of intense love that all these poets and writers and theater people had for the language that they were creating in. And so we've called this mural, and you'll see another part of it there. This is the Yiddish land section. So we'll go and take a closer look at it. All right.
Great.
Yeah, this is great. So we'll come a little, we'll take a look at, that's it. If you just hold it, just come a little closer, Lisa. Perfect. So this scene is Mendele, the Yiddish and Hebrew writer Mendele in Odessa. It's called Mendele Takes a Stroll in the City of Rogues and Gangsters, Odessa, 1890s. And so this is one of 35 scenes. They represent key figures, key moments, key trends, all those different things. Mendeler is there. He's one of the three foundational figures. Odessa, like so many of these cities, was, well, I guess a trilingual center of Jewish culture, really, Yiddish, Hebrew, and Russian for starters. If you were in Riga, it would be Yiddish, Hebrew, and Latvian. In Poland, it would be Yiddish, Hebrew, and Polish. So Mendeler is then partnered with, here we have, that's great. Just, yeah, you can come down and I'll tilt the screen so you don't have to lift it up. That's it. So here we have Sholem Aleichem finding inspiration for his railroad stories. Around 1909-10, Sholem Aleichem writes this whole set of stories called the railroad stories, in the persona of lots of travelers on the railroad, this sort of liminal space, this transitional space where you can meet anyone, you can hear any type of story. And here we have Sholem Aleichem taking notes from somebody he's getting inspiration from in his railway carriage. So the other thing to say, the other part of this mural is that we've put about 50 books down under the mural, representing another sort of intellectual side of Yiddish land. This is the Arabic Yiddish Guide, written and published for British troops in the Middle East around the First World War period by one of these crazy, prolific popularizers, Mr. Zelikovich, Getzel or George Zelikovich, who was reputed to speak and operate in something like 30 languages. A really beautiful thing, it's also in the YIVO exhibition that's on at the moment about Yiddish in Palestine and Israel. And we'll come down a little further, and the mural also alludes to politics and the important place of sort of radicalism, left-wing thought, particularly in the Yiddish story. Here we have the strike committee in a Bialystok cigarette factory in 1901. So this immediately tells you that, or alludes to the link between Yiddish speakers and, in this case, a sort of Yiddish industrial proletariat operating in a cigarette factory with a strike committee made up entirely of women. They were successful. They called a region-wide strike in Bialystok against Janowski, the owner of the cigarette factory, and they succeeded in their demands. So, we've got a section that's called Press and Politics. We could maybe talk a little bit more about that. The exhibition is really built around what are the three main pillars of Yiddish mass culture in the modern era, which is to say the literature, the press, and the theater. And it treats each of those in considerable detail, and then we add around it a whole set of thematic displays. We'll come down a little further, and we'll just pick out another one of these scenes. Lisa will do it. You can drop the screen a bit and we can do it like that. Yeah. So there we go. So this is a row of cribs in a sort of fantasy or fictional DP camp. But these are all real people. They're just represented as babies. So what this does is talk about or allude to the really extraordinary flowering of Yiddish culture in the displaced persons camps of post-war Europe, 45 to 55 roughly. This extraordinary moment when literally in the shadow of the concentration camps, and in some cases in the barracks that were previously concentration camps, a very intense Jewish life arose, because these were suddenly entirely Jewish communities of survivors and refugees, traumatized, but still in a position to run courses and publish newspapers and create impromptu theater groups. So what we have are some real people: Anita Norwich, her brother Sam Norwich, Sam Kassow, the scholar, Ben Sion Miller, the chazan, and in some cases they don't have the names that we know them by today. I asked Sam Kassow how he would like to be named on this little scene, and he said, well, as a kid, I wasn't Sam or Shmuel, I was Mulinka, so I should be Mulinka. So That is Mulinka in a little crib. That's Sam Cassell. And so on. There are many, many more of these scenes that if you come, come and spend time exploring the mural, we'll have a handout that gives some of the background to all of this. All right, so that's just the introduction. That is the Yiddish Land mural and bridge of books. So where do we go next, Lisa?
Down the ramp
Down the ramp. All right, come down the ramp.
with our study cam.
And this both the mural and the books work in a sort of geographic way. I mean, it was a crazy commission for the illustrator to stretch a sort of schematic map of the world from one side of our end wall to the other, but he did a really tremendous job, Martin. All right, so we're going to settle here for a moment. This is, these two sections here are our sort of introductory sections to the Yiddish literature story. And the one you're looking at here is just one wall of a section called bestsellers. I'm just going to go round and pick up for a moment. So, so really this explores the idea of what were people actually reading, right? Were they reading Sholem Aleichem and Mendler and Peretz and all the other writers? Yes, obviously. But were those the most read and most popular things? Not necessarily. And in fact, not in terms of the sort of size of the editions and what people would have bought at a railway kiosk, train station kiosk, they weren't. And so what you see here is one example of an extremely popular series that was published in Poland in the 1930s. And it ran to 275 little pocket-sized pamphlets. It's called the Groschen Bibliothek, the penny library. And it's a fascinating series because it combines a lot of Jewish subject matter with an intense interest in world affairs and all sorts of things. So here we have Peretz, the Yiddish writer. Then you have Pilsudski, the Polish leader who's just died. So he has a black-edged border. You have a book about a sort of intra-Jewish civil war centered around the underworld and the brothels of Warsaw in 1905. This one is about an Ethiopian aristocrat. This is Marie Curie. And this book, maybe you can see Japan. Japan, it's a book about the rise of Japanese militarism. So this is a series in the 1930s when fascism, the sort of darkening world is obviously extremely important and on people's minds in Poland. And so the series kind of transitions from a much more sensationalist tabloid agenda at the start to a much more heavyweight focus on world affairs. And here, just at the bottom of the picture, we've put an original, these are reproductions. This is an original book about Maimonides, Rambam, just to give you a size of how tiny these little things were. And they're very, very rare. They're very scarce. They were published in editions of maybe 20,000, hugely popular. They sparked reading groups across shtetls and cities. And the paper is so cheap that very few of them survived. But this one's in good enough condition to put inside the case here. All right. So that's just a little snapshot of the bestsellers section. There's a lot more about Schund, so-called trash literature. We focus on the Tzena Renner in this section, the Women's Bible, which is possibly the single most published Yiddish book of all time, and much more. All right. So should we pause briefly at this one also, Lisa?
Mm-hmm.
And this is another one of these wedges or kiosks. You can maybe see at the top the title, which is Expanding Horizons. And this really takes as its starting point the idea that, in complete contrast to how many people see Yiddish and the Yiddish world, which was sort of this barrier to change and this obstacle to modernization, I think a lot of scholars today are writing about it in ways that show us that it's actually the complete opposite, that Yiddish was the vehicle through which all sorts of modern ideas came into people's lives and homes and towns and cities. And also it was a sort of utilitarian functional tool to explore citizenship, for example, to talk about race, which is what this section does. Tremendous amounts of literature translated into Yiddish to give people access to the world of ideas and foreign literature. So that's Langston Hughes. That's the cover of a book of Langston Hughes poetry. We have Die Ballade von Little Rock, the long poem by Dora Teitelbaum about the Little Rock civil rights incident in Alabama. Yes, I think Alabama. American history is not my strong suit. And we have Uncle Tom's Cabin in the rail of books below. So that's just a little snapshot of this section. Here you have a side called Embracing Modernity, Science, how-to books about etiquette and fashion, books about sexual hygiene and health and romance, and how to flirt in Yiddish with these little cards here.
And how to assemble things.
And how to assemble things, hopefully in the correct order in the next week or so. Yeah, a lot of stuff still to do. So, so that's just a snapshot really of this sort of introductory literature section. And then, and then you come down the ramp and you explore all of this, and then you see this rather interesting room, which is like a sort of huge sukkah that we built here. But what is it? It is the Peretz Salon in the top letters there. So this is our sort of immersive space where we've recreated as best we can the really transformative experience that dozens, maybe hundreds of young men and women had of taking their first attempts at writing in Yiddish or Hebrew to Peretz in Warsaw. He was known to welcome people into his apartment every Saturday afternoon for an hour or two. He did this for 25 years. And so you'll step through that doorway into the space, and you'll have to come here to do it, or maybe we'll show it you once we open, because we're still sort of preparing it. But it starts with this quote. Let's set it down here, Lisa. I'll just yeah, that's good. So this, I'll just sit here. This quote really sums up this very widespread experience, and there are so many memoirs of what this felt like, this moment when you turned up at Peretz's door. People worried about how they were dressed, how they looked, what language were they going to speak to him in? Could they really address him in Yiddish? That felt wrong because it was the language of the street and the marketplace. So they sort of stammered out in Hebrew, and he would say, "Red Yiddish, you know, speak to me in Yiddish. We don't speak Hebrew here." And so the quotes by Froyim Kaganovsky really just captures this sense of trembling excitement. This was the space, you know, the room where it happens, right? That many of you must have seen Hamilton, that wonderful song, The Room. You know, you want to be in the room where it happens. So people wanted to be in the Peretz apartment and in the Peretz salon, and it would tell you if you were going to be a writer or not. Lisa, come and sit down. Maybe should we bring this closer?
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just going to move you all a bit closer to us. All right, so that you can hear us for one thing. And well, we together have had, I think it's fair to say, enormous fun putting the Peretz Salon together. Do you want to talk about some of the challenges?
Some of the challenges or some of the opportunities. It's been very fun. You've had a vision of what the salon would look like. You knew from writings that you had read that it was airy, it was open. And we wanted to recreate something. We wanted to put wallpaper up to make it look authentic, but not just any wallpaper. When we saw a photo of Peretz, a famous photo, we looked and saw that there was actually wallpaper in his salon. So that was a great thing that we did, which was the adventure of reproducing it from a teeny little photograph, which was really fun, looking for the portraits, the little items that we saw in the photo. It's been an adventure and kind of fun to channel him in a way. Yeah.
Right. And I'd always been curious about this space because my great-grandfather Sholem Asch did exactly that same thing, aged 19 in 1899. Came from the shtetl to Warsaw with his mates, Rezen and Nomberg, two other young writers, and they were a sort of trio of Peretz proteges, and that is where he learned how to be a writer. Who knew how to be a writer if all you had done was grow up with a traditional Jewish education and dream of the big wide world? Peretz modeled not just what to write about, but this idea of how to be a writer. How does a writer look? How does a writer act? So that's what this space explores, but in hopefully a fun, interesting, and sort of very visual way also. And one of the main challenges, as you know very well, was finding the women who were part of this space and part of this experience. And so we've done our best to insert women amongst, the Opatoshu and Ansky and Ash and Bergelsen and, so many great writers. And that was a sort of collective, collaborative adventure with Peretz scholars and a whole bunch of, very helpful academics and Yiddishists and the sort of community that really has helped shape this exhibit.
I think it's also testament to what's fun about the collaboration with you, which is that this idea it grows because the more you know about him, the more you know about the people. It pushed us in so many ways to kind of get it right. And if I may take a minute and just give a nod to Susan Bronson, our executive director, and Aaron Lansky. I mean, they came along on this journey. It was supposed to be something small, but it's anything but small. But in that, you've managed to help immerse the visitor in that experience. It's really, there's a transition that happens magically when you walk through that door.
Yeah, we've really focused on stories, visual appeal, images that tell stories and unpacking those stories. And an exhibition is not an encyclopedia. There's the Evo encyclopedia, there's the Jewish Women's Archive. There's so many places now where you can go to read up in detail about so many writers and trends and so on. There was no point recreating that or trying to, match that in some way. So while we've aimed at a kind of comprehensive story, it's selective and thematic and hopefully prompts people to go and explore further.
I can say it does, because reading about all the people that you've got in the Peretz Circle has made it apparent that they were all very interesting people. And then you want to sort of find out a little bit more about them beyond their portraits.
Yeah. All right, shall we move on? We're going to take you into our theater. We have two performance spaces here, the big hall and the theater. And where else would we put an exhibit about Yiddish theater except in the theater? So it's very much a work in progress again, but we're going to take you and give you a bit of a glimpse into there. And the first thing we've done as you come in, those of you who know the center, just pause here for a second and frame this picture, Lisa. That's it, that's good. So this is the image that greets you as you come in. Previously, there were framed posters on the wall, but we found this just fantastic image of the theater audience at the Grand Theater on Grand Street on the Lower East Side in 1905, a year or two after the theater opened. And it's a glorious image, just slowly approach. Because what it does is tell you instantly that this is a mass entertainment business. This is let's pause there, and that gives you a sense of the stalls, the first level, the second level, down there. People are incredibly dressed up. There are babies, there are kids. This was a big deal to go to a sort of opening night at the Grand Theater, which was, I think, the first purpose-built Yiddish playhouse in New York, and a really exquisite, beautiful theater where Jacob P. Adler starred and many others. And so again, as I said, the literature and the press are both sort of engines of Jewish modernity, but the theater is very much the same thing. It's a driver of all sorts of ideas and communal sort of explorations about what it means to be Jewish in the modern world. It's extraordinary to think that Yiddish theater stars were being paid as much or more in some cases than the top stars on Broadway in the 1910s and 20s. The theater in America alone produced thousands and thousands of hits that we have as sheet music. And so, it was just an extraordinary institution. And so we'll give you a little peek this way, which is the start of the story of literary theater with Jacob Gordon and the Yiddish Art Theater and so on. But we're actually not going to show you much of that. Sorry, I'm teasing you. We're going to take you this way, and this is the other side of the story. And I have to thank my co-curator of this section, Karen O'Brien, who just came up with this brilliant idea. I was struggling and struggling. How are we going to sort of arrange all these sections that I wanted to show? And I reached out to Karen and said, will you help co-curate this section with me? And she's super enthusiastic and immediately agreed. And she had this great idea to split the music theater and the Kunsttheater, the literary theater, in two sides, and it just made everything sort of fall into place beautifully. And so just as we have Gordon on the other side, the sort of reformer of the Yiddish stage, we have Avram Goldfaden on this side as the guy who really starts Yiddish music theater and operetta. And so we'll show you a little bit of what's on this back wall. And so these back walls really open up sort of the big themes. And in this case, it's, let's see, that's all right, I'll show the headline there, which is, there it is, Moshe Tuchus, the fickle Yiddish theater goer, which is just a fun way of saying the audience. So this really deals with the audience. And here you can see a cute little child's scrapbook from 1939. Isabel was 9 years old when she collected this sort of star-studded set of Morris Schwartz's major figures when they came to Boston. And then I'll just show you who is this woman. She's a Yiddish actress, but she is famous, well, in our Yiddish theater circles anyway, as the woman Kafka writes about in his diary. When Kafka sees Yiddish theater in Prague in 1910, 1911 sort of period, he sees Millie Chizik, Mania Chizik, and it's this lady, and he goes completely head over heels in love, turns up with roses at the theater night after night. He's too shy to present her with the roses, so she never gets them. And so that's just a little, Lisa, should we sit this here?
Sure.
That's just a little snapshot of the theater audience panel. And then in the Goldfaden section, we have this glorious image of Nadia Neroslavska, one of the great leading ladies of the Yiddish stage. She's in the role of Shalamis here. That's a YIVO image. I have to thank YIVO. There's something like, we counted this, almost 1,000 images, objects, pieces in this exhibition. And so many of them we've relied on YIVO, who've been tremendous, this sort of super multi-million piece archive in New York. You can see Michael Yashinsky, one of today's Yiddish theater stars, as the Bubba Yachna, another Goldfaden play. We'll just flip it to this picture behind you, which is, actually, this is such an amazing picture. I have to, it's okay, Lisa, you stay there, but we will, you have to, I think that gives you a good enough idea. I found this picture on eBay and it totally blew my mind. And it was a strange sort of journey because it was described on eBay as something like Oriental, Arabic, Middle Eastern king and court. But it quickly became apparent when I saw the writing on the top that this is actually Goldfaden's Bar Kokhba, and the company is in Jaffa in Ottoman Palestine around 1908. And it's just a mind-boggling image of these makeshift costumes of a Yiddish theater company in pre-state Palestine at that time. So thanks to eBay for that one. We have left no stone unturned.
It's funny to sit underneath that quote. One can say that I compiled more than I composed, but compiling is also an art.
Yeah,
So curation, my friend, curation.
Yeah, it's it's a challenge. I'm aware at this point really of so much that's not here. I mean, as much as there is so much here, I'm aware that there's not enough about the labor movement, and there's not enough about the hometown organizations, the Landsmannschaft, and there's nothing about this writer or that writer, but that's inevitable. That's inevitable, really.
But it's an opportunity too, I think, that we've talked about, that you can have these sort of smaller exhibitions or exhibits that would be companions in a way and tell some of those stories.
Yeah, and I guess we should quickly, how are we doing for time? I have no idea how we're doing for time. We're okay.
Okay.
So it's worth just saying what you haven't seen, which is a section about Yiddish and the Holocaust, a section called Celebrities, about the moment at the turn of the century when Yiddish writers and theater people primarily find themselves on commercial postcards and talked about and in huge posters and plastered up on the street. So the sort of transition from a culture where the celebrities are rabbis and sort of traditional authority figures to one that's much more recognizably celebrity obsessed, like the world has been ever since, but through a Yiddish lens. So that's celebrities, and then we have a section called Saving a Culture, which is about heritage and preservation. We have a lot of music. We've put our sheet music, we've rearranged and sorted our sheet music, and that's there, but with a lot more besides, and curated playlists of songs. There's also a lot of audio in here. There are a lot of opportunities to listen to
and watch
music and watch. Yeah, watch contemporary Yiddish theater. There's a section a little way along there called Women Behaving Badly, about Nellie Kassman and Bessie Tomaszewski and Molly Picon and Peppy Littman, and these transgressive, assertive, feisty women stars that people loved, and the sort of risque, double entendre songs that so many of them sang. And that's got an audio track associated with it. And then there's a big section on politics and the press. The Yiddish press was tremendously important in so many ways. It touches on all these other areas. It was the place where you read about the theater and you saw the adverts for the theater and you read the gossip about the theater stars. So we have a big section on theater and on press and politics.
And also, I think you touch on politics through schools, through camps, all of the ways that it infused itself, as it were.
And I brought this, I mean, since we're sitting in the Goldgarden section, this is, if Alisa Quint is watching, happy birthday, Alisa. It's her birthday, and yeah, well, this is Alisa's book about Goldgarden and the rise of the modern Yiddish theater. But she has just, with Amanda or Miriam Chaya Siegel, collaborated, yes, on a landmark book about women on the Yiddish stage. All of which is to say that one of the kind of joys of putting this exhibition together at this moment is the opportunity to draw on this wealth of new scholarship, new translation, and reflect the sort of creativity that's happening around us in the Yiddish world. It's a sort of golden age of all those things, scholarship and translation and new work, being written and acted in by the likes of Michal here. And so we've tried as much as possible to sort of reflect some of that, really the moment, this sort of intense creative moment in Yiddish scholarship and these other areas, which has made this possible. There's so many people one can turn to, who were the women in the Peretz Circle? I'll email Sam Kassow and he'll say, well, you should look at Chava Shapiro. I never heard of Chava Shapiro, so I go and look her up. And that sort of, reflected so many times. Kind of Pollock at the forwards has been so helpful trying to nail down some of these really obscure details that we wanted to use in some of the captions. And so the sort of Yiddish community has really risen to this sort of challenge of helping create this with us.
I also think it's worth mentioning all of the people who have, like this, the autograph book. This really brings to life that this, not, you know, the people who made the culture, but also who consumed the culture.
Yes, that's right. Because, you know, the starting point in a way was the books. And the starting point for so much here is the books and the stories they tell. But, you know, how have the books come to us? This is not a standard library that goes and purchases new books. All these books have come from families and children, grandchildren, descendants, many of them bearing the marks of the original readers, messages, dedications, stuff found between the leaves. And so we've over the last few years, the bibliography fellows and myself, sort of successive bibliography fellows, have really been on the lookout for, you know, unusual books. We found we found 3 books with stamps from Cairo, Egypt. How did Yiddish books end up in Cairo, Egypt? Well, just like they got everywhere else, because there were Yiddish readers in Cairo and Yiddish theater groups and a Yiddish newspaper, and, you know, but who would have thought that? So we've picked out a couple of those books and told their story in one case, just to take Yiddish into these sort of far-flung corners.
Before I'm binging because I have to get questions on my phone this evening,
Correct.
everybody, because I'm too far away to read them on the screen. But before we take some of these questions, one aspect that you missed, which is just, I think, got everybody here so excited. It's really wonderful, are the 16 story cases. Speak about those a little bit, if you would.
Yeah, so those of you who know the center know there was an exhibit about Yiddish literature called Unquiet Pages that sort of weave in and out of the book stacks, and that operated in 16 display cases, and we've repurposed those so that each becomes its own sort of mini exhibit and tells a kind of unique story, a sort of surprising or extraordinary story, and many of those feature objects that people have donated and loaned. Zachary Baker, the sort of doyen of Yiddish bibliographers and great scholar, Zachary went on a fact-finding and advisory mission to Buenos Aires in the wake of the 1994 terrorist bombing in Buenos Aires that hit the main Jewish community center and killed around 90 people, destroyed a huge amount of archives. So Zachary went to advise on how they should go forward. And when he was there, they gave him as a souvenir a sort of hand-sized chunk of granite that had been blown off the facade of that building, the Amir building. And he kept it ever since. And when he heard about the exhibition, he said, "Do you want me to loan it and you can display it?" And I said, "That would be amazing." Because this tells so many stories about Yiddish in Buenos Aires and about the sort of frailty and fragility of archives and so on. So, you know, that's its own story in one of those cases. We have a wonderful set of objects that were part of a trousseau brought to America in 1905 by a woman who became known as Ida Pollock, and her descendants, thank you, Harold and Berner, if you're watching, have again, you know, loaned us this extraordinary set of a samovar, a cooking pot, cutlery, her recipe notes. And those are just 2 examples. There are so many more. There's an extraordinary watch that belonged to a klezmer musician called Joseph Chernyavsky that he was presented with at the Imperial Russian Court in the 1900s that Jonathan Fox, his grandson, has loaned us. And, you know, just amazing objects with just extraordinary stories that talk about migration and transition and these sort of journeys, archetypal journeys, very specific, but also very universal stories. And I think that's, you know, so many stories can be both particular and universal, and that's how the exhibition is hopefully relatable to people.
Also the Hirschbein song. We
Oh,
would be
and
remiss if-
yes, and I totally missed, we have the leather steamer trunk that Peretz Hirschbein and Esther Schumacher, this starry literary power couple of the early 1900s, they spent 10 years on traveling the world and staying in an ashram in India and fetching up in Tibet and going on to Honolulu and to Buenos Aires and then Cape Town and on the road literally for 10 years, and this trunk went with them, and they brought back astonishing souvenirs, which have stayed in the family ever since. And their daughter-in-law, Jessica Hirschbein, has been just magnificently generous and helped us create. We wanted an exhibit that spoke to the just unbelievable distances that Yiddish writers and theater people traveled routinely as part of their professional lives, because there were audiences in all these different continents who were desperate to see them and receive them and host them. And so they are the perfect couple to tell that particular story.
So should we take some of these ping questions?
Yeah.
Okay. First off, is it a permanent exhibition?
Is it a permanent exhibition? Yes, it is a permanent exhibition. It is going to be up here for many years, which will allow us to correct the mistakes that we can see even now that inevitably happen in any project of this size. So we're busy picking those up, and will be for a little while. But yeah, it'll be here for a good few years.
3 pillars, literature, etc. What about music?
What about music? So music is in a way the 4th pillar, but it's music is so much part of the theater story, not completely. There's a whole world of Hasidic music and a whole world of folk song. So yeah, if you want to see music as a 4th pillar, that's generously reflected here. Yeah, certainly.
Did you try to deal with variations and dialects of Yiddish by region or country?
So I'll fess up. I'll make an admission and a confession. This was such a big project, and it was taxing us to the max, really, that around a year ago, I guess, we made the decision to leave what was going to be the introductory gallery, which we were calling the What is Yiddish gallery. So we've retained the sort of basic introductory information about the Yiddish language that was always here, but we plan to really expand on that and explore some of these issues, like the different dialects, in a much more comprehensive way, in a new gallery, when we all recover and have a holiday and come back.
Don't hold your breath. No.
Yes.
This might be a question from somebody who knows you. Did you already have the artifacts, for example, the penny books, or did you acquire the new stuff for the exhibit?
So that's a complicated story, and actually the Groschen Bibliothek is something I've been obsessed by as a publishing project and I've been collecting them as I found them on eBay or at auctions for many, many years. And then I found that Lyudmila Sholokova, who's now the New York Public Library Judaica librarian, was similarly obsessed, and we wrote an article together for Packenträger some years ago. So those are actually mine, because the center sadly doesn't have very many of them. If I had duplicates, I'd put them in the center's collection to beef it up. But most of those are, they're just extremely rare. They're, in some cases, actually not, I think I did some research on this. Most of them exist in literally a handful of copies, and in some cases, I think possibly not even a single copy. Lots of other things. How have we found these images? Some of them are on, the Library of Congress website and museum websites. And
I have to ask you then, Celia Adler, tell the story.
Oh, so over the other side of the theater, we have really a glorious painting of the Second Avenue star, the sort of leading lady and prima donna Celia Adler, daughter of Jacob Adler. And I spent far too much time browsing internet auction sites, and I was doing that, and I came across an image, and it said painting by Ludwig Zatz. And that sort of, set off a light bulb because Ludwig Zatz partnered Celia Adler and was a major film and theater stage star in his own right. And I thought, surely that's not the Ludwig Zatz that I know, or, you know, there's got to be another painter called Ludwig Zatz. And then I clicked on the link and found myself staring at a portrait of Celia Adler because they didn't name her in the description. And then I thought, it's got to be him. And it turned out, actually, it was him. And I later found out exactly how the route that this painting had come to the auction house. There was a descendant of Ludwig Zatz in the area. He was a very accomplished amateur painter. So much so that he would at times play roles of a sort of bohemian, La Boheme type, you know, garret artist, starving artist. And he would actually paint a picture during the course of the play. Anyway, this portrait is very beautiful. They were auctioning it starting at $75, and I went to Susan Bronson, my boss, and I said, Susan, we've got to have this for the exhibition. And she said, well, how much is it going to cost us? And I said, who knows? Because, you know, anything can happen. It's an auction. She said, well, let's establish, you know, a ceiling. So we agreed on, I think, $250 as our ceiling. Anyway, no one else bid. So we got it for $75.
And it's glorious.
And it is really, it's really beautiful. And it's, you know, the story is just so wonderful because Zatz desperately wanted to marry Celia Adler, and she turned him down, and he ended up marrying her sister, Lily. So, you know, when you know all of that, and you can sort of read that into the portrait, and it's just fabulous.
How did the resulting exhibit transform from what you may have originally envisioned, and what did you mean?
How did it transform from what we originally envisioned? You know, in some ways it stayed, it's grown and grown, but it stayed sort of close to the original vision as it was developed some years ago. I mean, a lot of these objects that have sort of found their way to us, or we've gone out and found, have shaped it in different ways, you know, have allowed us to focus on, I mean, we have a story there of the matinee idol, Michal Michalesco, full of glorious memorabilia, including his gold cigarette case. That was just a fabulously generous gift from Jack Lechner in West Hartford, who's a relative of Michalesco's. And there you have, you know, you immediately see the sort of gifts that people would give to their stage stars. There's a gold cigarette pen and pencil case in the Hirschbein trunk. You know, all these people were feted and adored by their many fans. And so, you know, that collection just fell into our lap at a time when we were beginning to sort of map out the theatre section, and then immediately just lent itself to a separate display case. So it was a sort of two-way process, serendipity to some extent. Yeah.
Any thought of bringing this to the wider world, mobile travel exhibit, virtual components for those who cannot make it to Amherst?
Yeah, many thoughts about how we bring it to you if you can't come to us. There will be internet variants of it. We're hoping to create a catalog of we've just been overwhelmed and too busy to think of, you know, trying to do a catalog in time for the opening, but it definitely is something we'd love to do. Yes, there are all sorts of traveling mini displays that could come out of this. I'm looking at a set of extraordinary lantern slides of the Yiddish theatre stars of the late 1890s that, as far as we know, are the only surviving set of lantern slides of Yiddish theatre actors, and that's a set at Evo. And we've spent a lot of time putting the names to those slides. And, you know, if we do a catalog, that's an opportunity to actually show them in all their sort of fullness, with all the names of the sort of upstart, you know, these faces full of bravado and just sort of, you know, ready to kind of take on the world. So there's a lot of scope to sort of tell these stories and curate them in different ways.
I would also just add to, from the public programming point of, whatever, that we do plan, once we pick ourselves up on October 16th, to do a lot of programming in conjunction with this to sort of take deeper dives as we can. What, I think they mean, what in the exhibition are you most proud of?
I'm excited about the finished state of the Peretz Salon. It's almost there. We're just sort of dressing the desk. I'm very excited about the Hirschbein trunk display. It's very personal to me, not just because of my great-grandfather, who's sort of so much part of this whole story in this world, but for example, in the theater, I loaned myself an album that a very good friend of mine, the Yiddish actor Harry Ariel, created. I knew Harry when he was getting towards the end of his career in London, and he had come to London from a DP camp in Austria in 1947, 48. And before leaving, he was a very accomplished artist, a bit like Ludwig Zatz, and he painted scenic backdrops in London for decades in the Yiddish theater in the East End. But he created this very personal album at this transitional moment when he was leaving the DP camp and about to come to a completely unknown future in London, a city he had never visited, having lost his entire family in lodge-based family in the Holocaust. And I mean, Harry was extremely important in my sort of journey into Yiddish, and especially into getting excited about the Yiddish theater. Anyway, he didn't have children, so I ended up having this DP camp album, and that's in a case at the end of that section. But also, I was able to connect that to the photographs of his parents in a section, a sort of memorial section to actors who were murdered in the Holocaust. So both his father and mother were Yiddish actors in Lodz, touring to Odessa and other places. And there's just a delightful picture of his father holding up Harry as a, I don't know, 2-year-old, even maybe 1-year-old baby, just sheer delight and pride in his son. And so that photograph of his father is on the opposite wall to Harry's DP camp album. And for me, it was just, an opportunity to kind of give some of these people a memorial, a sort of permanent place. There's no tombstone to Hirsch David Ariel or Harry's mother, just as there are no tombstones to millions of, their people. But there he is on the wall, and Harry's there. And my friend Bernard Mendelovich, who was equally important as another Yiddish actor I knew so well, has a wonderful quote in the section about Jacob Gordin. Gordin famously composed Der Yiddische König Lear, the Jewish King Lear, and the Queen Lear, Mirella Ephros, a sort of counterpart play. So Bernard grew up in a very working class Yiddish-speaking family in Manchester. Father was a tailor, an absolute diehard fan of the Yiddish theater, and the only King Lear he knew was Jacob Gordin's King Lear. And Bernard said to me, when you ask my father who were King Lear's 3 daughters, he would say Ettela, Gitela, and Tybala. He would not have known there were any other daughters of King Lear. So it's a marvelous quote, and that's on the wall, just as a way of sort of illuminating just what a profound influence Jacob Gordin had on the lives of the hundreds of thousands of people who came to see his plays.
Maybe we will make this the last question.
Oh, do we have to?
No, we don't have to. Actually, they're still coming in. Okay, stay with us.
So much more fun
okay.
than the work we were doing earlier today.
Right, and if we stay awake, we'll be fine. David, what do you think your great-grandfather might think of this exhibition?
I hadn't even thought of that. Probably say, why isn't there more of me?
We have his medicine ball.
We have his medicine ball. I don't know, that's a great question. What would you have thought? I have no idea. He was, you know, one of the things that I'm passionate about popular culture, Yiddish popular culture, just as much as I can get excited about watching a film of the Dybbuk or, you know, reading Bergelsen, or in a way I get more excited about the sort of street end, you know, the sort of dirty end of the music hall and vaudeville and shund and trash and this whole side of the modern Yiddish world that was really ignored by the critics and by academics for so long, and is now kind of coming into glorious technicolor really at this moment. So there's this, you can find online this wonderful project, I think it's called shund.org, that Saul Zaret at Harvard has been working away at for years, and has created this glorious website, putting as much of the popular fiction from the Yiddish newspapers, the press, online as a way of allowing people to really get the full measure of it and connect the sort of ashes to, you know, Sholem Asch was a middlebrow, you could say, a middlebrow writer who, you know, wrote his weekly literature installment for the forwards like everyone else did, and how, you know, how did that shape how he approached the craft of novel writing? I mean, that's as important a question as the sort of more high-minded literary questions. So as much as this exhibition tries to connect the consumers and the readers with the creators, it also brings what we, you know, ludicrously call sort of high culture and low culture into the sort of much more organic relationship that I think they certainly had in the Yiddish world. And that's true of all these main, you know, as a Yiddish actor, you had to be able to do song and dance and then turn to a Shakespeare monologue. Mm-hmm. And you know, it was very, very few of the top performers who could afford to really specialize in you know, one thing. Almost all of them were so multi-talented. So they would not have recognized these sort of distinctions of ours. And I know that doesn't really answer your question, because I genuinely don't know the answer. I have to think about that one more.
This will be the final question. Interesting. What was one thing that each of you were adamant that had to be included? Was it the same thing?
You go first.
I go first. I can't honestly say that there was one thing. This is going to sound so funny. I was adamant that things that you were adamant you wanted that almost didn't make it. I wanted to realize that for you, because I learned from you the importance of those certain things and why they mattered in telling the story.
Well, that's not entirely true. I don't know when we arrived at the idea of this sort of gallery of portraits of the Peretz Circle, but you had this just transformative, brilliant idea that they would not just look like this, just be prints on vinyl, but they had to be framed in antique frames as though they were in Peretz's room, you know, pictures of his friends. And so, you know, that was just one of many great ideas that you injected at just the right time that just make the thing sparkle, I think, and just give it this sort of multifaceted, textured dimension. I'll say that for me, one thing that we have done that I really felt strongly about and wanted to be there was a book that doesn't exist, actually, and that's in the Holocaust section. And this, when I read this story, it just I couldn't stop thinking about it. And this is the story of a writer called Rochel Brochus, who is gradually being translated and discovered. I mean, has been, in a sense, over the last 20 years, but not in any sense well known. But was, you know, a name in the Yiddish literary world in the 1900s and 10s and 20s, and published a great deal, but entirely scattered in periodicals all over Central and Eastern Europe, in America, the Zukunft, and so on. And finally, when she's in her 60s, in getting towards the end of the 1930s, she's in Minsk, and the State Publishing House begins the project of collecting these scattered stories from all over and publishing an 8-volume set of her stories. Totally unprecedented for a woman writing in Yiddish. Pretty much to this day, there is no collected edition of Rochel Korn and Kadia Maladovsky and Celia Dropkin and all these great writers. They were very much viewed as sort of second-class figures in the literary world. And so you have all these 20-volume and 15-volume collected works of Opatoshu and Ash and Ansky and the others, nothing like that for a woman writer. This would have been the first. The war comes, she's killed, the publishing house is destroyed, the plates are gone, the thing just goes up in smoke. So we don't have the 8 volumes of Rochel Brochus. So I really wanted to create a memorial to her. And actually, as you know, I really wanted it to be in marble. I wanted a sort of marble monument to the vanished books of the Rochel Brochus collected edition. Anyway, we've created it, not in marble, understandably, but in a different way. And so it's a sort of ghost book. It's a memorial to a vanished book. It's part of the Holocaust section. And again, it's a way of giving somebody who has no tombstone, an address, a sort of resting place. I'm going to get emotional. But a sort of appropriate resting place at the center, in a way, surrounded by her peers, by people who will discover her story, and that was important to me.
And adjacent to something that celebrates her in a contemporary way.
Right. So as we've done throughout, we brought her in close proximity and partnership with Alona Bach, wonderful young Yiddishist actress, translator, PhD student, brilliant person. And Alona has created, you'll find it online, Die Zogerin, Z-O-G-E-R-I-N, Die Zogerin, the female prayer sayer, a 15-minute animated film, which is a Rochel Brochus story of this woman, this woman who's just fed up of saying prayers for rich people, and that's all she does. And it's a gorgeous, gorgeous animated film that's just been created in the last year or two. And so that sits on the wall and says that Rochel Brochus, you're having a continuing influence in our world.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Joining me.
And thank you all for joining us. Come here.
And all of you out there who've helped to make this possible. We've had a lot of support, and thank you. Thank you for joining us this evening. Our opening is October 15th in Amherst, Massachusetts, from 10 to 5. It's a day of free events, tours, pop-up performances, all sorts of things. So come join us then. And if you can't come on the 15th of October, we're open after that every Sunday through Friday, 10 to 4 p.m. Let us know if you want to take a tour. Elizabeth Carteropoli, who we thank as our producer of these public programs, is also our associate director of the visitor services. So get in touch with Elizabeth and learn more about how you can come and visit. Thank you for joining us tonight. We hope you'll be back again for a full slate of programs, both live now and also virtual. So check out yiddishbookcenter.org/events. Until we see you again, stay well, stay safe and happy. And thank you again to all of our members whose support makes all of this ongoing work possible. Have a good evening. Thanks.